Hello, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Call to Arms, which is episode 26 of Season 5 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest poll for Deep Space Nine is a Call to Arms. So Call to Arms follows the episode where Sisko is sick of the Dominion sending in reinforcements through the wormhole, so decides to mine it, which is in danger of starting the war. But when Wei-Yun threatens war, Sisko says bring it on and refuses to take the minefield down, so Wei-Yun and Ducat arrive with the fleet. And although they are able to erect the minefield, the Dominion take Deep Space Nine, while Sisko and all the Starfleet crew are forced to retreat and abandon Deep Space Nine. So, this is the Season 5 finale. This is when the show really got good. Now, if you know anything, this is the beginning, basically the beginning of the Dominion take over the station story arc, which is a story arc that starts with this episode of the Season 5 finale, and then it runs through the first 6 episodes of Season 6. So it's basically a 7-episode long arc, which was a huge deal for Star Trek. It had never done anything like this before, and the producers fought them every step of the way, but they managed to do it because, well, the main producers didn't care all that much about Deep Space Nine. They were more worried about Voyager, so they were able to get away with actually producing really excellent television. How dare they? Anyway, so I'm a huge fan of the Dominion War story arc, and this is the first episode in that arc, and so I love it. I think it's a great episode. I actually would go as far to say that this episode is the better version of A Way of the Warrior, which, honestly, I think that's an overrated episode. I think this is an overrated episode too, to be fair, but I think Way of the Warrior is more overrated. I'll get to this episode being overrated shortly, but as far as Way of the Warrior goes, I know a lot of people disagree with me. A lot of people have it in their top 10, top 5. For me, it's top 50, maybe? No, maybe it didn't even make my top 50. It's more like top, I don't know. It's a good, decent episode, but it's nowhere near as good as I think everyone else makes it out to be. And the main issues I have with it is the political circumstance surrounding that episode. Mainly the Klingons being the enemies, which I think is a huge mistake, and as my sister pointed out on her channel, that Gowron was completely, utterly, and totally out of character in that episode, and they just banished war for no good reason, and the episode kind of dragged, and I have a lot of issues with it. Don't get me wrong, I give it a 7 out of 10. I don't think it's a bad episode, but it's definitely not an 8 or 9 or 10 out of 10. I think that's going too overzealous. So why am I bringing up that episode here? Because Call to Arms is similar. It's a very similar episode. In fact, some people might be like, oh, we've seen this before in Way of the Warrior. Yes, but this is better. Because, first of all, it's the Dominion and the Cardassians, which it should have been. It was a mistake in Season 4 for them to diverge and focus on the Klingons as an enemy. Huge mistake. The Dominion and the Cardassians always should have been the focus of the show, so they're getting back to what they should do. And the Klingons are the allies in this episode. Martok is there to help them. That's the way it always should have been. Anyway, I get a sidetrack about that. So the political circumstances makes much more sense. Also, I like the fact that this episode is shorter. It's a 1-hour episode as opposed to the 2-hour episode of The Way of the Warrior, so it's a lot punchier, more to the point. The other one tends to drag a bit. And, and they're similar because it's both Deep Space Nine battle situation where Deep Space Nine is going to come under attack and everyone has to prepare for the war. You get a lot of character scenes with people like, oh, Deep Space Nine coming under attack, we got to prepare, blah, blah, blah. So it's very similar to the Way of the Warrior. And of course, the actual attack as well is also similar to Way of the Warrior, where you see Deep Space Nine like throwing a shit ton of torpedoes and go, against a huge fleet trying to take them over. So they're very similar. And to be fair to Wave the Warrior, which I think is perhaps why a lot of people love that episode, there's more action in it, but that doesn't win me over. I like the fact that the action's more punchy and it's more about the story, more about the plot, more about the characters, rather than action scenes that drag on for too long because they look cool and they have good stuntmen. Anyway, but that's just my opinion on the matter. Now, let me backtrack to that little nugget I threw out earlier where I think this episode's overrated as well, even though I do love this episode. So I mentioned Way of the Warrior is like barely top 50. For me, this episode is top 30, maybe top 20 at best, depending on what my mood is, but no more than that. Not top 15. And so I've seen a lot of people put this in their top 5. Or at least top 10. In fact, on IMDb, this was in the top 5 of highest rated episodes for DS9, which I disagree with that because I don't think this is the best episode of the Dominion War story arc. I think there's 2 other episodes that beat it. In fact, 3 actually, really, but there's 2 episodes of the Dominion War story arc that I think deserve to be in a top 5, top 10, that were in my top 5 and top 10. And that's Sacrifice of Angels, the episode that ends the story arc. I thought the episode was fucking amazing. Better battle sequences, better emotional impact, and the editing is just beautiful. God, what the hell is that other one called? Behind the Lines, which I get a lot of pushback on because it has a subplot with Cisco, which is kind of just okay. But some people try to say that subplot is terrible, and I disagree. That subplot's not terrible, it's fine. And you're thinking, well, if the episode has a subplot that's just fine, then it can't be a great episode. I disagree. I think if it has a subplot that's just fine, but the A plot, the main plot, is fucking amazing, then it's still an amazing episode. I think that amazingness overwhelms a mediocre subplot, and that comes with the Odo dealing with the female changeling and being like seduced by her. I thought that was an absolute one of the best character pieces in the entire show, and if it wasn't for the mediocre subplot, maybe it would be my number 1 and number 2. But instead it's my number like 7 or 8. So, I mean, the subplot does not bring it down that much, and I disagree with people saying, oh, the subplot ruins the episode. Totally does not. But that, again, is another issue. Now, the third episode, which in the Dominion story arc, which is 7 episodes long. So if you follow my meaning, that plays Call to Arms pretty much smack in the middle. The third episode I think is better is Rocks and Shawls, which some people do think is actually top 5, top 10. For me, that's more like top 20. Maybe top 15. No, maybe not top 15, but higher than Call to Arms. just by a little bit, not by a lot. Like Sacrifice Angels Behind the Lines, I think is better than Call to Arms by a lot, which is why I kind of highly disagree or get a bit irritated when people showcase Call to Arms as the best episode of the Dominion Take Over the Station story arc, when to me, clearly it's not clear. It's like the middle one, best one, either Sacrifice of Angels or Behind the Lines. Those are the 2 I will accept, and I'm sticking to that. I don't care what anyone says about the Cisco storyline. Behind the Lines is still a fucking amazing episode. Anyway, so yeah, Rocks and Shells I think is, I also enjoyed that. Maybe slightly more in Call to Arms because, again, that was more character based. It was more to the point. There are some flaws with this episode, which I will get to later. That I think those 3 other episodes I may name do not have those said flaws. Now, since I'm ranking the arc, I might as well say if Call to Arms is number 4, then number 5 would be the what's the one that's building up to Sacrifice of Angels? Favor the Bold. That's what it's called. Which I thought was a decent episode, but again, some people try to say that's better than Sacrifice of Angels. It's not. It's the build up. It's the lead up into it. It's similar to Call to Arms is the lead up, build up to the whole arc, whereas Favor the Bold is just to build up the, setup for the big finale, and the big finale is definitely way better than the setup. And then the 6 best episode. In fact, I might place Favor the Bold higher than Call to Arms. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, so maybe, it goes Sacrifice the Angels is number 1, then Behind the Lions, then Rocks and Shawls, then Favor the Bold, then Call to Arms. So it's all the way down to number 5, and then 6 is A Time to Stand, which I had already reviewed. But I have a lot of issues with The Time to Stand, but it's still a good episode. And last, of course, is Sons of Daughters, because the whole Worf Alexander subplot was fucking awful. And it wasn't subplot, it was the main plot, sorry. And it was, the subplot with Ziel was actually good, but the main plot was Ziel Alexander and, what's his face? Worf, Martok. That was terrible! So, mind you, so that puts Call to Arms down at number 5 in this arc, but mind you, I love the whole arc. I think, well, except for Sons and Daughters, but but I love the whole arc in general. As a whole, I love this arc, and I think it's one of the best things the Star Trek franchise has ever done. So saying it's the 5th of something amazing is still good. It's still amazing. It's still in that amazing thing, and not the exception that sucks like Sons and Daughters. Anyway, so yeah, that was a bit of a side plot. Anyway, I will say this is definitely one of the best cliffhangers in all of Star Trek. I think when I did a countdown, I believe, of the best cliffhangers, and I only count like season-ending cliffhangers that set up the next season. And I think this is my number 2 behind Best of Both Worlds, if I remember correctly. And that does sound really right to me. That, and I don't love Best of Both Worlds as much as everyone else does either, but in both cases I will admit that there was the most best sort of cliffhanger setting up the next season. This definitely was, even though I think they kind of let us down on this cliffhanger in the next episode, but I'll get to that later. But overall, yeah, I think it's a really intense, really got me charged and ready for the next season, and really excited, more so than I think pretty much any other episode in Star Trek other than Best of Both Worlds. And on that topic, I remember when I first saw this episode when I was 17, and this was in my party times, because this was the season 5 finale, and this was over the summer, aired in June or something, and that was that summer of 97 was the I believe it was 97, pretty sure it was. That was my classic party year. That was if people, I know some people have years, but I had a year where I would go out, hang out with friends, get into mischief, run pranks, get stoned, get drunk, all that sort of thing, all summer long. It was they make movies about it, whatever, like Dazed and Confused. For me, that was the summer of 97. So that's why I missed a lot of episodes in season 5. And actually, I missed a few at the start of this war story arc in season 6 as well, because I was still, partying. But I remember watching this episode and going out and getting stoned and hanging out with my friends, going to parties. And some of them, my closest friend also watched Star Trek, although he wasn't a huge friend of DS9, which, everyone can be wrong if they like. But of course, it was when it was airing. It wasn't as popular as it is now among Star Trek fans when it was first airing. Mind you, that seems to be the case with every Star Trek show, but anyway, that's another topic. Anyway, so I remember telling him, and this other friend who was more of a Star Wars guy, but he was, a passing interest in Star Trek. And so I remember watching this episode and going to the two of them. I'm like, oh my god! Then my friend who actually liked Star Trek, but not Deep Space Nine as much, he watched it with me. That's right. And we went to the other guy who just is a Star Wars guy who doesn't watch Star Trek, and we told him about it. We're both so enthralled. Oh my god! At the end of the episode, the fucking Defiant went and joined a fleet! You saw a giant fleet of Federation Starfleet and Klingon ships. Oh my god! Now, from a modern perspective, you may be thinking, especially if you're young and you weren't watching these episodes as they aired back in the 90s, you might be thinking, so fucking what? Big deal. A fleet of Starfleet ships. Because since this episode aired, we have seen that a lot more. Even in Deep Space Nine itself, we see tons of fleets with tons of, Starfleet ships and tons of huge battles with hundreds of ships. And especially in modern Trek, it's a very common thing and it's very by the numbers. But what you need to understand is when this episode first aired, this is the first time we've ever seen anything like this in Star Trek. Mainly because I think this is when they first finally started using computer-generated images, CGI, which is of course very early. I think they might use it was a very, very early version of CGI, not as early as Babylon 5, which looks like video games, but they waited to perfect the technology before they started using it, and so before that they had to use models, and it was super, super, super expensive to use models, especially if you use more than one. So that's why if you watch Next Generation, they just have one ship sitting there in space. Maybe you see two Romulan ships on the other side, and it just go boom, boom, boom. You didn't see anything like a giant fleet of hundreds of Starfleet and Klingon ships just going. That was unheard of. That was prohibitively expensive. You wouldn't see anything like that in Star Trek before this episode. Now, I mean, like that, you got the Way of the Warrior, as I mentioned earlier, which had a huge Klingon fleet, but that's different. It wasn't as big and it wasn't as exciting as seeing Cisco go off into Defiant and join a huge, bigger fleet of allies getting ready to go to war. That was just I also was blown away by the battle scenes, which I think outdid Way of the Warrior, and it was just really exciting. But my friend was less excited about that. He was more excited about the big thing at the end with all the Klingon ships. So this was a huge deal back in the day. My Star Wars friend was actually kind of impressed. We're oh, maybe I should check this out. I also told him about quantum torpedoes. He was interested in that. Anyway, so what else I want to talk about this episode? So I love not just the battle stuff, but of course the character stuff in this episode, particularly that of Wayne and Ducat, who I think are the two best villains in Star Trek, pretty much. And they're together, and and Jeffrey Combs and Mark Alamo are both freaking amazing actors. So every time you see them on screen, it's amazing. Now, one of my favorite scenes in this episode, I think, is one of the most intense, awesome scenes, is when Wayne finds out about the Cisco building the minefield, so he goes to Deep Space Nine, and he just immediately is let me get right to the point. Remove those mines, or we will take this station from you and remove them ourselves. And God, I can't remember exactly what Cisco's response was, but it was something along the lines of, go ahead and try. I ain't taking the fucking minefield down. Well, he didn't say fucking, obviously, but he was like, no, I refuse. As long as you're sending ships, I won't take the minefield down. I didn't write it down as a direct quote. I'm sure someone will put it in the comments. Anyway, it was amazing, intense scene. And however, as soon as Cisco said that, as soon as he said, no, I am taking down the minefield, go fuck yourself. Nah, I'm adding that in. But anyway, as soon as he said that, Wayne's oh, well, let's come up with a diplomatic solution. And they had this, I think it's at least 3 minute long scene, maybe 3-4 minutes, where they're talking about ways they can get around it. What if we just send hospital ships? And Cisco's well, would Ducat go for that? And he's oh, don't worry about Ducat, I'll take care of it. And they immediately cut to, and then they were we have an agreement? Yes, we have an agreement, and we're not going to fight. There you go. They shake hands, immediately cut to Cisco saying, yeah, they're going to attack us. That was brilliant. And Cisco's yeah, as soon as I said that I would refuse to take down the minefield, we both knew we were going to war. Everything else was just trying to lure the other into a false sense of security. I didn't buy it. I don't think he bought it either, which of course was correct. And that's awesome to me. That is really fascinating that they spent all this time like bullshitting each other, even though they both knew they were bullshitting each other, on the off chance that maybe they would get away with it, but they knew they wouldn't. And that's a really nice way to sum up Wei Yun's character. I just thought that was a beautiful scene. Now, oh god, I forgot to look this up, but I'm pretty sure this is like only the second appearance of this version of Wei Yun. No, third appearance, I believe. If I'm not too incorrect, because of course Wei Yun appeared in season 4, but that was a different clone or whatever. They made up the whole thing of Warriors being cloned just so they could bring Jeffrey Combs back, and I actually think that was a smart decision because he's amazing in the role of Wei Yun. Anyway, so he appeared in the Ties of Blood and Water was the first time he appeared, and then he appeared in the Cards when he was negotiating with Kai Wynn, and then this episode, unless I'm forgetting one. I'm pretty sure that's it. So he's fairly new at this point is what I'm saying, because all those episodes were kind of right before this one. So you still don't, as an audience when this came out, like you didn't have a handle of who he is, but that scene really like hammered it down like pretty damn well exactly what kind of guy Wei Yun is, and Jeffrey Combs, as I said. Can't say enough good things about Jeffrey Combs. Anyway, Ducat's awesome as well. I love the scene where they kind of had a couple of good moments in this episode, like when when Ducat like communicates with D9 that when Sisko figures out they're on their way, he's able to break Martok's communication, warning them that they're coming, and says, "Oh, I don't suppose you would just surrender now and save everyone all this bloodshed." And Sisko's like, "Absolutely not." And Ducat responds, "I was hoping you would say that." That's such a Ducat thing to say. It's such an awesome thing for the character, because it's like, I want the fucking bloodshed. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to killing a lot of your people. Even though some of his people will die, also, he doesn't really care. Now, and this is also followed up on in the scene when they arrive at D9, and they're all excited, and they're like, "Oh, first D9, then on to Bajor," and Wei Yun has to rain on the parade and be like, "You're not fucking touching Bajor because they're our allies." And Ducat's like, "Fine, whatever." But then when the fleet is approaching and they're getting ready to fire, like, I just think it's I love Marco Lamo. It's a great moment for Ducat where he says, like, "By all means, Damar, fire." Like, he says it like he's choked up. Like, he's just so overfilled with glee and joy about getting to attack D9 and take it over. Like, he's been waiting for this moment for 5 years, as he said. And he's just so, like, overwhelmed with excitement and happiness and joy about getting to kill a lot of people that he's like, "By all means." It's like someone who's about to get married or something would like say, or someone who's just having giving birth, and we're like, "Oh, by all means hold the baby," or something like that. But for him it's like, "By all means kill a bunch of people. I'm so happy." That's Ducat. And that, yes, that was fucking awesome too. Anyway, yes, and then there's the baseball, of course. That was another good way to sort of have a cliffhanger to set it up for the next season, where Ducat finally goes to D9, takes it over, but sees that Sisko left this baseball, and he's like, "It's a message. He'll be back in about 6 episodes from now." Dun dun dun. Anyway, now it's a good way to build tension, even though it is a little obvious that it's just like, haha, so Sisko will return in season 6. But it's a nice Ducat moment too, because he recognizes that. It's like the whole like adversary admiration kind of thing that they've done in Star Trek before with like Chang. from Star Trek 6. And that whole admire your enemy and respect them, but still you want to kill them. Like, so it was a great moment that I did really appreciate. Now, also, this episode was paid off. In fact, I've talked about this in another video I did, but I haven't actually reviewed this episode yet. There was an earlier episode, it's called Rapture. That's right, where Sisko is taken over by these Bajoran spirits or whatever, the prophets' spirits take him over, and he has all these visions of the prophets, and one of the visions he has leads him to believe that the Federation, that Bajor should not join the Federation. If I may quote, "The locust!" Pretty much what he said. The locusts are coming to Bajor! Anyway, God, I love Avery Brooks' overacting. Even though it's clearly bad, and he's clearly not a good actor, but I still love it. Anyway, that's so Lucas. So that was actually amazing foreshadowing, and I love how they didn't actually draw too much attention to that. It was setting up for this episode, because if Bajor had joined the Federation as they were about to, then they would have been destroyed in this moment. When the Dominion took over DS9, they would have, Bajor is part of the Federation, so let's conquer his Federation world. They would have been fucked. And so, because they didn't join the Federation, they're then able to make this non-aggression pact with the Dominion in order to keep it out of the fighting. Which, of course, Sisko pushed it, because at first they weren't, we're not going to fucking do that. But then Sisko urges them, convinces Bajor to do it because it's the only way to save it. And he was absolutely correct. So that was interesting, and I remember calling back to that. And, if you rewatch that episode, you think, so this is what he is referring to as the locust, whereas this Dominion fleet. The locust! Anyway, I'm sorry, I just love saying that. So now let me get into some of the negatives of this episode that I had hinted at, that do exist, that do keep me from, which is why this is only like 5th among the episodes from the Dominion story takeover arc for me, and why I think it's the absolute wrong episode to represent the arc and say it's the best one. Clearly that's either Sacrifice of Angels or Behind the Lines. Anyway, and the reason why is because, several reasons. Some of the flaws. Let me get into some of the flaws. First of all, there are a lot of subplots in this episode that make it feel too much like a soap opera. And that's a problem with Season 5 overall. And in fact, all of these subplots I'm about to get into originated in Season 5. And Season 5 just got too soap opera-y and too much involved with, let's put these pairings and couples together. And this episode just focused a lot on that, and it kind of annoyed me. So, first off, we got Rom and Lita, which is a huge part of this episode. In fact, whenever I think about this episode, I think about the Rom and Lita, because this is the episode they get married, and I'm like, ugh, that's so dumb. Like, it was a dumb pairing. But what was worse, it's okay if you want to put Rom and Lita together, I suppose, but why are we focusing on them so much in this episode that's supposed to be about the Dominion, first of all? Second point, they got married way too damn fast. It's like they just got together 10 episodes earlier, just halfway through Season 5. By the end of it, they're married. I think that's a bit ridiculous. And secondly, I don't think Rom and Lita is funny. I didn't like how Rom said that, the speech to Lita to convince her to go to Bajor was just a verbatim quote from, I think, Casablanca. Someone might correct me on this. Some classic movie. Ira Steven Behr is too fucking obsessed with classic movies. I'm sorry, but he is. And as soon as I, watching this scene now, I'm like, Ira Steven Behr, get over your fucking obsession with classic movies. That's what I thought when I was watching that scene. Anyway, also, Yeah, so, and then when Ron goes up to Cisco and is like, will you marry me? I know it's supposed to be funny, but I'm like, yeah, it's not funny. That's stupid. And they're arguing over the dresses. That's how the whole episode starts. Like, I don't care. I don't care. I mean, Ram and Lita are an okay couple. I just don't care about this shit. It shouldn't be in this episode. Now, that's only one aspect of the soap opera thing. We also have, Garrick and Zial, which to me is a terrible pairing that never should have happened. Garrick is like in his 40s or 50s. Maybe let's be generous and say 40s. And Zial has been established in the first episode she appeared in to be 14 years old! Now, granted, they did change casting. They got a different actress who's clearly older. Some might even argue looks to be late teens, early 20s, and you could even push it to, let's say, early mid 20s, but I think that's stretching it. Doesn't change the fact that, as according to canon, as according to an episode that aired only 1 year previously, she was specifically stated to be 14 years old, and he's in his 40s. I know people love to bitch about the fucking Kess and Neelix. Say, oh, Kess is only 2 years old. No, she's 2 years old in Ocampan years. In human years, she's actually in her 20s. Neelix is in his 30s. Someone in their 20s with someone in their 30s, I don't see the big deal with that. And one of these days I'm going to do a whole rant about how people who bitch about that don't understand Ocampan years. Do you have a 10-year-old dog or do you have a 14-year-old dog and call it a teenager instead of a senior when clearly it's a senior? Anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. Like, Cass only lives to be 9. Is she still a child then, even though she's clearly an old lady? Anyway, sorry. That's the discussion for another time, as Mas Caminado would say. Point is, this is much worse. Because they're both Cardassians. And if you try to bring up some bullshit about how Cardassians age differently, that's just contrivance to explain away this clearly couple. And plus, I don't think Garrick works as a character when he's in a romance. I think putting him in a romance with anyone, even if, let's say, the other person was his age, still wouldn't like it. Because I think he works better, unless it was Bashir, but that's... That's another topic entirely. But anyway, I still wouldn't like it because this character doesn't work well as a, as a in the lovey-dovey romance type character, which is what they have these things like when he's telling Zial, my dear, I survived all this and blah blah blah, and she's like, by becoming the greatest tailor in the galaxy. I just want to kill myself well, maybe that's an exaggeration. I just want to moan and groan at this scene whenever I see that. I'm like, this is so dumb. Like, Garrick, like, stop being a pedo! Sorry, stop it! Fuck it. Anyway, and as I said, even if, let's pretend they're the same age, I don't buy their chemistry, and I find it annoying, and I think it ruins Garrick's character. Anyway, let's see, what else have we got? We got Dax promising to marry Worf. Now, I am more in favor of the Dax Worf romance. I've actually rated that one of my favorite Star Trek romances, but I thought it was really cheesy and really out of place how Dax just randomly goes up and says to Worf, oh, the answer is yes. He's like, yes to what? Yes, I will marry you. Actually, he never asked her specifically. He implied, it was definitely implied and understood that he wanted to marry her, but he never specifically asked her, so that's actually incorrect grammar for her to state it in that fashion. But, regardless, I think it felt a really contrived way to raise the emotional stakes because they're going off in different ships and who knows when they'll see each other again, so they're going to get married, and they kind of did toy with this at the start of season 6, which I was never a huge fan of. even though I do like this couple, I don't know about that particular scene. It didn't rub me the right way, and again, it's fed in with all the other stuff. It's just too soap opera-y. Now, the one soap opera-y romancy type thing I actually did like in this episode that did kind of work for me was the Odo and Kira. Odo and Kira, of course, is another pairing that I personally love. Is another one of my favorites. I don't care what anyone else says. I still love it. And I felt it particularly worked in this episode because this episode was continuing a thread where Kira found out that Odo had feelings for her, and it made them both very uncomfortable, so they were ignoring each other. And we had this really nice scene that I really appreciated where Odo went to her and was like, look, I've been thinking about asking you out to dinner, and that's why I decided I'm definitely not going to. It's not going to happen. We need to, look past this and move past it. We have bigger things to worry about. And Kira, it's like, oh, so all we have to worry about is the, Dominion fleet coming to kill us all. And Odo's like, yes, I feel better already. That was a nice scene. I did appreciate that. But the other stuff was way too soap opera. So to me, that's what brings this episode down a bit. This is why I wouldn't put it in my top 5, top 10. Part of it is because and I always think about it when I think about this episode, all the soap opera stuff, especially the shit that doesn't work like Ziel and Garrick. Anyway, there's also like Rom. I already talked about his, speech to Lita, which is just quoting a classic movie. But then he gave this other speech to Quark, who's like, oh, I'm here to protect you. I need to stay here to look after you. And I didn't like that either. That didn't work for me either. That felt dumb and out of character for him. Also, Jake deciding to stay on the station felt very contrived to me. They just wanted Jake to be in the station because they thought, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if Jake stayed behind and we could do more stuff with Jake? Of course, they don't really. He's just kind of there in season 6 and doesn't really do much except sometimes be like annoying. And also, like, they turned him into a reporter when he was supposed to be an author, not a reporter. He's like, he even says in this episode, when he stays behind, he's like, I'm a reporter. I'm like, no, you're not. You're a fucking novelist. You're not a reporter. But, they can't really think of any storylines with novelists, and he's a reporter all of a sudden. Like, they're the same thing, which clearly they're not. But, anyway. I know some reporters write novels, but they're still reporters first, not novels. Anyway. I don't know. It felt like it didn't make sense for him to stay behind on the station. There was no reason for him to do it, and it felt really contrived to me. Okay, so let me get into actually now my biggest issue with this episode, which, to be fair, is kind of some of these issues I'm about to bring up are more of issues with the next episode of Time to Stand, how this is resolved. However, if they cannot resolve this setup properly, then it should have never been set up this way in the first place. And that is mainly that the war strategy presented in this episode is completely flawed and doesn't actually make any sense. First of all, and this is a point I made in the season 6 end of the story arc as well, and it's actually most appropriate for this episode, is that the Bajoran wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant is the single most strategic location in the entire Dominion War, or any Dominion conflict. It is the singular highlight, location that is more important than anything else. In fact, it's so important there is no real life analogy of a war, a location in a war being as important as this, because this is a science fiction scenario where the Dominion have their base, their home, all of their resources, all of their fleets, all of their entire stockpile of everything, like their home base, is to the Gamma Quadrant, and the only way to get from the Gamma Quadrant to the Alpha Quadrant, which is where the war is taking place, is through the Bajoran wormhole. So it's a funnel. Everything must go through it. And so Starfleet's strategy here is completely fucked up and makes no sense. And of course, I know why they do it. The writers do it for the plot contrivance. But as a actual war strategy, it doesn't make any sense. Because first of all, and I'll get into the fleet not showing up and why they didn't show up shortly, because that was fucking stupid. That was nonsense too. But first of all, if they were going by real tactics of what Starfleet should do, they shouldn't have waited this long to mine the wormhole in the first place. They should never have allowed this many Dominion, especially if season 6 is to be believed, where they stockpiled the Dominion in Cardassian space so much is that they're easily winning the war. It should have never gotten to that point, because Starfleet should have started mining the wormhole to begin with. And on top of that, it shouldn't just be Cisco with the Defiant out there mining the wormhole. Starfleet should have sent practically everything they have to DS9 to protect it immediately. Like, as soon as the Cardassians join the Dominion, the Dominion goes off to Cardassia and they joins it like instantly. Every fucking fleet, practically, maybe they'll leave some few to protect the Federation, of course, but the bulk, like the main bulk of, like, let's say hundreds of ships, maybe 300 at the bare minimum, should have went to DS9 and protected it and barricaded, so if any Dominion ships tried to go through the wormhole, they would instantly have like 300 ships staring them down and beat the shit out of them, and put up the minefield then. And then kept those ships there, so all the ships that are already in the Alpha Quadrant, which would have been a lot less because they would have done this earlier, they wouldn't have a chance of taking down the minefield, and this giant fleet would come in there and kick their ass. Now, why do I say this is the best strategy and what they should have done? Easy. I mean, it's easy. As I said, the wormhole is the only way for the Dominion to get from A to B. So if they're blocked in this one tiny funnel, then there's no possible way they could get reinforcements. There's no possible way they could. Now, you could say, oh, the Dominion have this magical shipbuilding and they can breed Jem'Hadar in the Alpha Quadrant. But even as we see in Season 6, this takes a little bit of time to do so. And if they first block their passage, first thing, block the passage so that the Dominion can't send any reinforcements, and do it early before they have that many reinforcements in the Alpha Quadrant, then they can go and try to attack the Dominion's ability to build ships and Jem'Hadar in the Alpha Quadrant, which is honestly insignificant compared to bringing their resources, because they have this vast empire with superior numbers, far superior numbers, in the Gamma Quadrant. So that is far more of a threat to them than the dinky building ships or breeding Jem'Hadar in the Alpha Quadrant. That they can handle. All their reinforcements coming from the Gamma Quadrant, they cannot handle. So that, and this of course is relevant to Sacrifice of Angels too, because Cisco had to convince Starfleet to take back DS9, which is bullshit. And in fact, I think they even mentioned in that episode, if Starfleet had any brains at all, they would have never let DS9 fall in the first place. So that leads to the excuse that we're given, because they do bring it up in this episode. Bashir is like, I think it was Kira or someone was like, so we're going to bring Starfleet should bring some ships to help us. Let's say 50. Which I think is not enough, personally. They should bring like 200. but okay, so they say, someone's like, let's bring 50. And Cisco's like, no, they can't. They're busy elsewhere. And we find out at the end of the episode that they're attacking these shipyards again, which is addressing the other thing, which, as I mentioned, is the minuscule word compared to the Gamma Quadrant reinforcements, is a much bigger threat than fucking shipyards. But anyway, they, so all the Starfleet ships and Klingon ships were too busy destroying these shipyards in order to protect Deep Space Nine. No, that's not, and also, especially if you consider season 6 and the next episode of Time to Stand, where destroying those shipyards seemed to amount to exactly jack shit. It accomplished nothing. They were still losing the war. They were still getting their asses beaten on a regular basis. And so it seems like attacking the shipyards was a complete and utter waste of time, and they absolutely should have sent that fleet and more to Deep Space Nine if they had any brains in their head. Anyway, also on this same topic, for that matter, I think this episode sets up the Dominion War to be something different than what it is in season 6. I think, especially that ending scene. As I said, that ending scene where you see the Defiant and the Return join this huge fleet of Federation Klingon ships, and it's going, yeah, this is vast, huge fleet, and it looks awesome. I'm so excited. Oh, they're gonna go off to war, and it's gonna be so amazing. This huge fleet's going off to fight the Dominion. And in the very next episode of Time to Stand, they totally destroy that cliffhanger and tromp over it. And I did already talk about it when I reviewed that episode, is because you see that same fleet and they're in tatters, they're broken, they're destroyed, and then everyone's like, oh, the Dominion's kicking our ass, we're losing, oh, we're lost. Which to me is not the situation that this episode set up. Especially since it was, to me, especially watching it again, it's very clear that it's more of, we have to build this minefield now while we're even, so we can stay even before they get the numbers on us. And we'll destroy the shipyards too, to make sure they don't get the numbers on us. So it's more presenting an even fight, which to me actually would be better and make more sense. As much as I do love the Dominion War story arc in both seasons, I think season 6 in particular, they turned it, as I said in the very first episode of season 6, they turned it in a contrived way from an even fight that's really exciting, both sides are going to fight, oh, this is going to be awesome, to, oh, we're losing, we're fucked, we're definitely going to lose, they're way superior to us, there's no way we can win. And to me, that's kind of a writer's crutch. That's kind of a lazy thing to do for writers, because they rely too much, because it's too easy of a way to build tension. And this is something I had an issue with Stargate SG-1, because it did this with all of their enemies were very impossible to beat, and we're gonna conquer the galaxy, and they did this in Atlantis too. They make their villains unstoppable too much, and it's too much of a crutch in this situation. To me, it would have been more exciting if they were evil. Even if they were equal. And it's because then you can have all these war stories, specific battles, strategy. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. Maybe the Dominion's getting the upper hand, and that's why Sisko has to do the bullshit with the Romulans. Not because Dominion will definitely win, but because the Dominion are starting to win in this even fight, and so he's got to even it even more and take it down this way. To me, that's more interesting. This back and forth even fight, then, oh, we're fucked, we're gonna lose, and then all of a sudden they win anyway. And part of the reason why I say this, and I addressed this in season 7 too, because, in season 6, Bashir had his, genetically enhanced dudes who were like, oh, there's no way we're gonna win, the Dominion's definitely gonna win, and they predicted everything that happened in season 7, yet the Dominion still lost. Because when they were saying, oh yeah, the Romulans are going to join the war, sure, and then we're going to have this, and we're going to do that, but the Dominion is still going to win. Nothing really happened in season 7 that they didn't predict, yet the Dominion still lost. So I just wish that they never did that. They never I wish it was more of an even fight. I think it would have been more exciting, actually. Not just as exciting, but even more exciting. I call it a crutch because it's just like, our heroes are so beaten, they're so down, how could they possibly win? And so it builds the tension of, they're not going to win, and they win! Oh, isn't that amazing? Which, I think that's too weak. That's too easy. I think it's better to have it more dynamic where, they win here, but they lost here. Oh, but they lost here, but they're winning there. Like, they could still have the Dominion take over Beta Z because they're slightly getting ahead, and that's why Cisco does the Romulan shit to get even upper hand, and maybe they do something else where they're on top again. And they kind of did that anyway, even though we're told repeatedly, not shown, that, we're going to lose. Yet it was actually a bit more of an even fight. So just 86, that whole we're going to lose, we're fucked kind of storyline, which is, to be fair, a bigger issue I had with season 6, particularly at Time to Stand. Like, that whole episode was like, we're so fucked. And, like, it was obvious why they were doing it, but I think to me it would have been harder, more difficult, better writing if they didn't do that. If instead there weren't, like, it would be more exciting to me if season 6 began with that huge fleet that we saw of Federation Starfleet, Klingon ships going, kicking ass, and then maybe Dominion do another fight there that kicks ass back, and it's tit for tat rather, we're so fucked, we're gonna lose. Like, that's kind of, I don't know. That felt really contrived and not what this episode was setting up for. And I honestly think, from watching this episode, that this was not their intention. They just, when they start writing season 6, they couldn't think of a way to make it interesting without relying on that crutch of, we're so fucked, which is the easy way out, in my opinion. That would have been more challenging as a writer, but ultimately more rewarding, more interesting had they kept it an even fight. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be the Starfleet always had the upper hand, because I agree that's not interesting, but have it so it goes back and forth. But anyway, I think I harped on that point enough. But yeah, that really, even though it's more of a problem with season 6, it bothers me about this episode because that's what this episode is setting up for, and it doesn't happen. Also, you remember Cisco 197? That's the program that Cisco had in place to destroy Deep Space Nine, or destroy his computer. And as soon as he leaves, it's supposed to be this badass moment where Kira's like, computer, operate to execute Cisco 197, and like you see the sparks flying and the computers being destroyed and the station's being totally fucked, and Kira's like, they want our station, they can have it. And then the very next episode, the station's back to normal, so that again pretty much equated to jack shit. So they presented like this huge, exciting thing. Aha, see, Cisco got the upper hand because he destroyed the station computers as they left. But then the next episode takes place 3 months later when they have repaired it and it's no longer an issue, so who cares? That, not as big of a deal as what I mentioned before, but I still think it's kind of a letdown. I don't know. Maybe some people disagree, maybe. I don't know. That's what I think. Anyway, my rating for Call to Arms out of 10 is a 9 excellent. Yes, I still give this a 9, not a 10. I don't think it deserves a 10 because of the flaws I mentioned. But, the flaws I mentioned aren't so bad to bring this episode down further than that. I still think it's an amazing episode. I still think is one of the best cliffhangers in all of Star Trek. It does a better job in Way of Warrior of building tension, of being punchy, despite the fact that this gets distracted by the soap opera shit. It still has a lot of great character moments in it, and the Ducat and Wayun, of course, as I say, elevate. Rather than having fucking Gowron acting out of character, you've got the amazing acting of Jeffrey Combs and Mark Alamo and these great intense like moment of doom where you really feel. I didn't feel that in the Way of Warrior, that I said, oh, the Klingons going to attack the station, they're going to fight them off, whoop-de-doo. Whereas here I felt like doom was coming, like the Dominion Cardassian combined fleet, and they're gonna fuck you up. And I felt that tension when they were fighting, and when the Sisko left, it was really really intense, really amazing. So I still really love this episode. One more nitpick I forgot to mention is how when they're evacuating the station, Sisko like gives this big speech, and it's a touching speech, and I love it. It's like, we'll be back. But it was really considerate of the Dominion fleet to stop attacking, to give Sisko this time to make the speech and everyone time to get out. And in fact, they even said, oh, the Dominion's coming back for another pass. I'm like, well, where the fuck did they go? Like, why did they stop attacking? Anyway, that's so the show could happen, of course. But anyway, despite that, I still love this episode. I just don't think it's the best. As I said, it's fifth to the best of the Dominion takeover arc of the station, in my opinion. Anyway, that is it for my review of Call to Arms. Be sure to check out my channel for more Star Trek reviews, as well as I cover other shows such as Star Wars, The Clone Wars, Better Call Saul, Lower Decks, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.